Good evening, fellow cooperators, and welcome to this evening's part two in domestic violence against men. A very important topic, a very sensitive one at that. But before we get into our discussion, we are streaming live from our rescue headquarters situated at number 40 Fifth Street in Woodbrook, Trinidad and Tobago. And as always, we always like to invite the Holy Trinity into our midst. So we will say our usual prayer, the Synod prayer, which I love so dearly, as we invite the Holy Spirit to guide this conversation. And as He guides the conversation, that He pours His Spirit into your household to bring the necessary healing that is so needed. So if you can open your hearts as I pray. We stand before you, Holy Spirit, as we gather in your name, with you alone to guide us. Make yourself at home in our hearts. Teach us the way we must go and how we are to pursue it. We are weak and sinful. Do not let us promote disorder. Do not let ignorance lead us down the wrong path, nor partiality influence our actions. Let us find in you our unity so that we may journey together to eternal life and not stray from the way of truth and what is right. All this we ask you, who are at work in every place and time, in communion with the Father and the Son, forever and ever. Amen. And of course, in no way does this prayer is meant to disrespect anyone's religion. So we just want to offer praise and thanks to God for this evening. And to my left, I have my brother again this evening with me, Mr. Nigel Thomas, EAWS, maybe you can tell us what that is, coordinator from Families in Action. Nigel, welcome once again. It's a pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
So, just to do a recap, the last time on the program, we started off giving some statistics on men being abused. And it was so surprising to me to see that the gap between men being abused and women being abused is very, very minimal. So just a quick recap for maybe those of you who may not have looked at the video and may not have been here with us. So it says here, and this is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. It says 30.3% or 1 in every 3 women have been physically assaulted by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And then the topic that we are dealing with this evening, domestic violence against men. It says 25.7% or 1 in every 4 men are or experience physical abuse from their partner. And just jumping down very quickly, and what kind of abuse are we talking about here? We are talking about a fist or being hit, kicked, cuffed, slammed, or choked, beaten by their wives or girlfriends. And then when we go down the road, we are seeing here again that even in terms of the emotional abuse, and some persons, when they talk about abuse, we always think about physical. We never talk or think about the other dimensions of it. And this one again was very surprising to me, Nigel, because it says that women who are emotionally abused is 48.4%, and the men are 48.8% being emotionally abused. And then we cannot leave out as well our LBGT community. And it says when they were doing the research, they hardly found any kind of information. But in looking at it again, it shows where the women are 32.6% abused and the men are 36.1% being abused in a gay relationship. So here we are again this evening, Nigel, to give actually a gift to fathers, because on Sunday, please God, we celebrate Father's Day. And some of our fathers may be experiencing either some kind of physical, emotional, mental abuse. So we want to dedicate this webinar to our fathers and let them know that we care about them, we love them, and we are opening an avenue for them where they can gather the information and gain that support. At the end of this webinar, our hope in the organization is that we can create a platform, a group, where men can feel free to call in and talk about whatever is bothering them, especially being domestically abused. Of course, you will have a lot of work coming your way. So, the abusive part of it, Nigel, sometimes we are being abused and we don't even know. So we will start off with the easy part about recapping what is abuse, what do we look for, and then I will throw a question out to you, which I know will open up for a lot of discussion. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much. So when we talk about abuse, essentially what we're talking about is a pattern of coercive behavior designed to establish control and the use of power. This type of behavior sometimes may present itself very clearly, very overtly, but there are other occasions where these behaviors may come across very subtly. Mm-hmm. And it all depends on the tactics that are being used, as I did share the last time. Think about a wheel. Mm-hmm. And at the center of that wheel, the axis of that wheel, is power and control. Mm-hmm. Each spoke that you see coming off that axis is a tactic being used. And you mentioned the physical abuse, and you went into the descriptions of what that looks like. Mm-hmm. You talked about the emotional abuse. Often at times that reflects itself in verbal abuse. So sometimes there are things that are being said to the man that breaks down his sense of confidence, mm-hmm. his sense of his manhood. It breaks his self-esteem. It breaks his self-efficacy in terms of his performance and competencies. So you have that playing out. Mm-hmm. But there are other forms. The psychological tactics, mm-hmm. being able to control by way of isolation, mm-hmm. stalking, mm-hmm. impersonation. Mm-hmm. All these are all designed to establish the control that we're speaking to. And of course, there's this belief that sexual abuse only happened to women.
Oh no. And I think we addressed that last time.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So there's also sexual abuse. And persons will ask the question, but how could a woman sexually abuse the man?
Yes.
You have to remember, we're talking about the use of power and control, or rather the abuse of power control, using coercive or controlling behaviors. So being able to withhold that part of intimacy with the man and use it as a bargaining chip. Mm-hmm. It's a form of control, it's a form of abuse. Mm-hmm. You may also find situations, and we have seen how this pandemic have changed up power structure in terms of streams of financial revenue coming into households. And now we have some instances where the man may have lost income. He may not be the primary breadwinner in the home. And that leveraging of the financial power, being the power broker, mm-hmm. sometimes used as a form of abuse.
Yes.
To keep that man in check, to remind him that he is dependent on the woman, the partner, if we're talking about those same-sex relationships, also to keep that person in check. So we have to be very mindful that it takes all these various forms. And these are just red flags to help you to start to look at your relationships a little closer, to step back and to pay attention. And if you are going through that, to be able to reach out for some support.
In your description, you mention about the woman or partner trying to, in my ways, break the man, keep him under control. One of the things that came to my mind is that, okay, the man is expected to be the provider in the household, and maybe he's not working, or maybe he's underemployed and cannot provide for his family as he should.
Right.
And I can also see there that some kind of abuse, because you hear it,
Right.
of the woman belittling the man,
Right.
because he cannot provide for her, he can't provide for the children, and then, okay, well, I am the breadwinner in the household now, so you have to do as I say and listen to whatever I say. So that in itself sends the man into a form of depression. What do you have to say to men who experience that kind of abuse in the household? Because it is difficult to be not able to provide for your family, and you're already feeling so depressed within, and then to be facing this kind of abuse as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think it's important for men to first of all understand how do they define contribution and support to the household. One of the biggest things that we have to be mindful when we talk about domestic violence against men is that there's a statistical correlation between the violence against men and how they are treated in terms of understanding expected cultural gender roles. So as you just shared, men are expected to contribute to the household by bringing the finances into the house or into the home. We have to ask ourselves, is it the right way to define contribution in that way? Men are not only providers, men should also see themselves and hold themselves accountable as also nurturers.
Yes.
So in terms of the conventional socialization that we've been taught, it's okay for a woman as a home manager. The man brings in the money. But what about those reverse roles?
Yes.
Where the man understands that his form of contribution may not necessarily be as the primary breadwinner in terms of the finances, but the roles are reversed and he becomes the primary nurturer and caretaker
of the household. Yeah.
And so I'm saying this to men, that it's important for us to have a very clear understanding in terms of how do we see and look at the concept of contribution. And what does that look like? If you have a healthy relationship with your spouse or partner, it's important to have those conversations up front. And if you're not having it as yet, start having it so that you can start setting expectations and have clear understanding in terms of how we're going to contribute. And of course, by being able to do that, you would find that there would not be these bloodlines or the inclination to abuse power from one to the other.
Yes. Because I can see that I may not be working or fully employed, but I am at home. And when you come from work, the house is cleaned. You have a hot meal. And the children came from school, they had their bath, they they are doing their homework, everything is under control. And in addition to that, now we have an opportunity, or I, as the man in the household, when you come home, I have prepared a bath for you.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's a good way to look at it as well.
yeah. So I know that you came from work and you are tired, and
Right.
and you are maybe frustrated, you are stressed, but the man now creates this getaway,
Right.
this sanctuary that you can come in. The bath water is there, music is playing, but there's no fantasy there. This can be a reality.
Yeah.
Because you are looking now and saying, as a husband or a wife or a significant other, and motivating and encouraging your partner in that wealth. And when I say wealth, I mean well-being.
Yeah.
So that when I come home and I'm seeing, okay, but I am blessed.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I have to come home,
Right.
I have to cook, I have to take care of the children. But I am coming home, my husband isn't working, he is not in the bar, he's not liming with the fellas. But when I come home, I have a meal, I have a listening ear. It's very, very important. So we want to give people the tools to say, listen, let us change our mindset. Let us reposition our thinking on how we view men as providers in the home. And I think when we use that term as men being providers in the household, we limit it to dollars and cents. And we need to get away from that, because what does it mean to provide? Does it mean only dollars and cents? Or I provide a safe space for you to be comfortable? Or I provide for you an opportunity when you feel hurt or depressed as my spouse or as my partner, that you can come home and knowing that you can trust to just vent. That too is also being a provider in the household. But we can go on until tomorrow morning with that. What I want to ask Nigel, and it is something that has been playing on my mind in preparation for this second webinar, and even before that, because you look at people, and be it a man or woman, but we're concentrating on the men,
Right.
and you observe persons just walking around as an empty shell.
Right.
And they are abused. They may have the opportunity to come out of it. But instead of spending some me time and regrouping and finding that healing, as soon as I come out of an abusive relationship today, the next 2 days I'm in another relationship. Why do you think men are afraid to be alone with themselves so that they can heal?
Very deep question. That's a very good question. There are a number of things that we have to consider.
Mm-hmm.
A man who's been in an abusive relationship often finds himself in a state of dependence, hopelessness, helplessness. In that situation, he needs someone to offer that support. And so being in that state of dependence, often at times, when they do get out, they feel the need to get that support because they have been psychologically molded to become powerless and helpless. Now, this is consistent with the abuse of that power and control Going into a new relationship,
Mhm.
the belief is if I go into that relationship, this person will treat me differently
Mhm.
to how I was treated previously.
Mhm.
So you go into the new relationship without setting boundaries,
Mhm.
without setting expectations,
Mhm.
emotionally and psychologically wounded,
Mhm.
still traumatized,
Mhm.
with the hope that someone, this new person, would save you.
And if I may just interject, I don't want you to lose your train of thought. But something came to mind as you said certain boundaries and expectations. And maybe as you go on, you can answer it. Expectations. Me as a man setting expectations in a relationship. And I'm saying it that way because we get into relationships and we expect relationships to just happen. And we don't sit and talk, and especially from a male perspective, set expectations with my partner as to what do I want out of this relationship.
Correct. You said it very succinctly there. It's important in starting that relationship, in going into that new relationship, to speak with your partner,
Mm-hmm.
to be very clear in terms of what are your needs.
Mm-hmm.
You may want something, but that's not your need.
Mm-hmm.
To understand what is your need as an individual, and to have a clear understanding in terms of what that person needs from you.
Mm-hmm.
And by having that conversation collaboratively,
Mm-hmm.
talking with your partner, not to your partner, or having your partner speak to you,
Mm-hmm.
you're now in a position to start to set the boundaries and expectations of a, and I say expectations collectively here now,
Mm-hmm.
for a healthy relationship. You're setting the ground rules. It's like walking into a room and you're to participate in some type of formal activity, and,
Yes.
they give you the rules. Let's be respectful.
Mm-hmm.
Let's switch off the cell phones.
Yes.
Let's be mindful of where are the exits in case of emergency.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different to relationships.
Mm-hmm.
The relationship doesn't fall to the sky and just happen.
Yes.
You have to build that relationship,
Yes.
and building that relationship requires those key ingredients to start it off. But to go back to the substantive point in that question that you initially started off, again, going into these new relationships for men who are struggling is often a call for help and a lifeline, because they have been in situations of hurt and pain over and over.
Mm-hmm.
They're really asking for someone to help them.
Mm-hmm.
They really don't want to be alone, because they feel that alone, even when they're in a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
they're abused, where they're taken advantage of,
Mm-hmm.
where they're hurt. So they're going into this new relationship with new expectations, with new hopes, but without the ground rules.
Yes.
Often at times, if you look at the new relationship, you look at the characteristics of even the new partner,
Mm-hmm.
it's a shadow of their previous relationship.
Wow. So, in other words, you are saying the law of attraction. And I often tell people what you focus on the most is what will continuously present itself. So, if I'm focusing that there's no escape, there is no help for me, uh, no one loves me, no one cares about me, but I end up in another relationship, that is what will present itself. So, what are some of the tools that a man can feel comfortable within himself to be alone with himself, seeking the counseling that he may need for the healing to take place, but also more importantly, how do you shut out the external voices, but more importantly, the internal voice that keeps telling you you are nothing, you are not worthy, you are not worth being in a relationship. Look at you and all the negative things is being, you keep telling yourself. So how do you get away from that and be strong enough to say, listen, it is okay for me to be alone, whether it is for a month, 6 months, a year, 2 years, until I get that healing and I'm able to share myself with another person without all the excess baggage.
Again, such excellent question, I must say. So there's an aspect that we tend to often overlook, which is the importance of aligning different selves. Every individual have different selves. You have the emotional self, physical self, psychological self, mental self, social self, spiritual self, intellectual self. It's about that alignment, and that takes time. Exploring yourself, being able to, and I spoke about this previously, you want to be able to introspect, reflect, and then project. You want to be able to introspect, you're looking at self presently. You want to reflect, looking at past experiences, making the appropriate comparisons between where you are now, and then be able to project, having an idea in terms of where you want to be. And as you look at that concept and you start to align the different selves, creating balance, whether it is, as you mentioned, speaking to your spiritual advisor, whether it is accessing professional counseling services, whether it is ensuring that when you socially interact and integrate, that you do so collectively and not by yourself with one person, because you then find yourself getting back into this relationship status arrangement.
Yes.
It's all important to start working on aligning different selves. And once you have a fair moment of introspecting, reflecting, and projecting, then I say you are on your way to achieve your gain. And what do I mean by your gain? I'm talking about your growth. I'm talking about your alignment. I'm talking about how you improve. And I'm talking about how you nurture. And just to bring that in, for the man to grow, he has to align the self. And for the man to align himself, he has to improve that alignment and then nurture it through self-care, self-love, self-compassion.
And what am I aligning myself to? And in terms of the alignment, and I think my own personal thought that a lot of times we feel miserably at the alignment with the reflection, is reflect.
So we introspect,
reflect, and then project. And sometimes we feel at that level because we think we can do it alone. And in attempting to do it alone, and I'm not talking about me coming to Nigel, or Nigel coming to me, or going to somebody else. But we try to do it alone without the spiritual aspect. Understanding that, listen, there's a song sung by Ms. Kathleen Battle. And in that's all Negro spiritual. I wouldn't sing it because then I have to start to pay for these vocals. in that old Negro spiritual, she is saying, fix me, Jesus, fix me. And I think we must understand that the healing that we so desire, we cannot fix ourselves.
Correct.
And sometimes we need to be honest enough, self-awareness, and say, but you know, every time I try to fix this thing, I am making more of a mess.
Right.
So as Kathleen said, fix me, Jesus, fix me. So in other words, you are giving yourself over and trusting yourself over your hurt and your brokenness to God to fix you. I belt it back at you.
Yeah, I think that you just hit the nail on the head in terms of answering the question there when we talk about the alignment. Because when I shared about the different aspects of self, one of those aspects is the spiritual.
Yes.
So when an individual is able to use that as their beacon, their guide, especially when you're in a state of helplessness, in a state of hopelessness, then you're able to start, and as you reflect, you look at the old you, and you pray, whether it's to your God, whether it is you a person have a specific religion that you follow, or you're just a spiritual person. You reach out to that greater force, that universal force, and you use that as your beacon, and you start redefining how you think. So you're not addressing the psychological.
Mm-hmm.
As you address the psychological, you start having a different approach in terms of how you feel about things. So the emotional aspect is now being changed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As you do that, you start aligning yourself with the people you engage with. So the social now starts to come into
Yes.
alignment. So then you start to expose yourself to material, whether it's reading, whether it's viewing, whether it's song. And so the intellectual aspect of you starts to. So it's moving these aspects of yourself into alignment and using that beacon that is like the driving force. And for some people, it's that spiritual component of themselves. But we also know there are a lot of persons there who are struggling with that area. And that's why it's important to know that if you are struggling there, you have the professional support services there. You have opportunities to expose yourself to programs such as this.
Yes.
To educate you, to connect you to resources that can help you.
Wow. And that is important because as you're talking about the introspect, reflect, and then project. As men, especially men that are being abused, and I how can I find peace in my broken pieces? And this just came to my mind because I remember reading a book by one of my favorite authors, Iyanla Vanzant, and it is Peace from Broken Pieces. And she shared that even though she is there counseling and helping people, that she herself was experiencing a lot of hurt. And I think her daughter died, and she was dealing with that as well. Beautiful book. If persons can get it to read, please do so. And she went into the supermarket. And with all that hurt and pain, right there in the supermarket, everything came down. And you know, usually when we go into supermarkets, I would just stack the oranges very nicely going up.
Yes.
So both herself and the oranges came tumbling down.
Wow.
Because everything just came out at that point in time. And that is why it is, how am I? I'm in a broken relationship, abusive as a man. And I am struggling to find my way out. In the meantime, how do I find peace in the midst of all of that? Until I am brave enough or courageous enough to say, I am leaving, or we need to go to counseling.
There's a quote that I want to share, and it reads, "Relationships are like glass. Sometimes it's better to leave them broken than to hurt yourself putting it back together." And I say that from the standpoint that for a person who is seeking peace, a person who is in that state of brokenness and in the relationship, they can't find the peace because the focus is on putting that broken relationship back together. And every time they try to put that relationship back together, they cut themselves, they hurt themselves. And if we use that quote as an analogy, what men can do, step back from those relationships, as we just talked about, because sometimes those relationships are unhealthy, they are toxic, and often the cause of the or I should say the facilitator of that pain and hurt, because they cause to be traumatic and it can be very historical.
But I'm afraid of being alone. And then too, this is my 5th relationship. I don't want to have another failed relationship. And these are the kind of things that you hear. I'm afraid of being alone. I don't want to have another failed relationship. So sometimes we prefer to stay there and become more depressed, become more angry with yourself, angry and disappointed with self, with the abuser. So how do I, and of course he said that sometimes it's best to just step back, and say, listen, let me exit this relationship, or let me seek counseling, work on me. Yes, and working on me. And sometimes I read a quote, I think it was last night or the other night, and it said, and I loved it. And it says that we don't find ourselves, because sometimes people may say, I have to find myself, I need to go away to find myself. But the quote went on to say, we create ourselves. And that's the part that I love about it, because we are spending time to compare our past with our present, what we want, what we don't want in a relationship, and even with the relationship with myself as an abused man. What kind of man do I want to be? And am I willing to make the necessary sacrifice? Instead of cutting myself with the broken glass, to be the kind of man that God created me to be.
Yeah, it's important we don't allow that state of brokenness to define us. And I'm going to take into context that point you shared when it is sometimes persons are afraid to be alone, and you don't have to be alone. I want to be very clear about that. You don't have to be alone. One of the tools that is important, especially when persons are struggling with that, is ensuring that you have positive, healthy support. That is, building a network of support that can help you to go through that struggle. Because when we look at some of the tactics used by perpetrators, it's to isolate the individual. It is to isolate the individual. So it's not a case whereby the person cannot have the support and have to be alone.
Yes.
The question is the person positioned or themselves in situation where they can leverage on that healthy, positive support. It might be a very close friend. It might be a loved one. It may be a family member. It may be somebody in the community.
Yes.
It's about building positive, healthy relationship. So you are literally counteracting the tactics being used to facilitate that helplessness, that is being used to facilitate that powerlessness, and that is being used to reinforce the thinking that I'm no good, that I'm worthless. Once you start exposing yourself to other persons who are giving you a healthier narrative, a positive narrative, then you're able to change those ideologies, those thinking patterns, those self-defeating thoughts,
yes,
to more positive thoughts, and that road to the recovery of peace that you spoke to. And there's a quote Carl Jung said, and I love it. He says, "I am not what happened to me. I am who I choose to become." So it's important for us to understand.
Can you repeat that again, Nigel?
Sure, no
please? Yes.
I am not what happened to me. I am who I choose to become.
Hit me it again. Hit me it again.
I am not what happened to me. I am who I choose to become.
And I ask you to repeat it because oftentimes we are stuck, and we are stuck in a victim role. Or I got it right? Yes.
Correct.
In that, woe always me. This happened to me, that happened to me. Oh God, I could never get a break. This one do this to me, and that one do that to me. And because we are stuck there as victims, sometimes we rob ourselves of what can become a very beautiful relationship, but we stuck right here, and we are afraid to move forward into the unknown, which can blossom into something very nice. So being a victim as well as an abused man, to me, is another dangerous part of the relationship. And even though you get out and you're stuck there as a victim, the relationship that you have now, it is cripples you in moving forward into what can become a beautiful relationship. So, courage. We need to be courageous, and we need to look at ourselves, because sometimes, a lot of times, as an abused people, we always blame ourselves. It happened because of something I said, because of something I did, and sometimes, and most times, it have absolutely nothing to do with you, but it has to do with the person, the abuser. Before going on to my next question, this question has came to mind as you were speaking about that. Forgiveness. I'm an abused man. What does it mean to forgive the perpetrator? And does it, even if I find myself forgiving, does it mean that I have to allow this person back in my space? Or I can forgive you and I move on?
Excellent question. The concept of forgiveness requires moving on. To move on, you have to come to a place of acceptance and understand it's a process of healing. you may make the statement now that I forgive you,
Mm-hmm.
but the psychological and emotional wound and scars may take time to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And for it to heal, it may be important for you to keep that person out of your space.
Mm-hmm.
Forgiveness also gives a sense of release
Mm-hmm.
and relief.
Mm-hmm.
So once you have come to that place that you can forgive the person genuinely,
Mm-hmm.
and you're able to release that person
Mm-hmm.
or the burden that you carry because of that person,
Mm-hmm.
you are able to move into a relationship, or as you had shared, you have the chance to move into a relationship or move forward with your life in such a way that it can blossom positively. There's one major challenge to that,
Mm-hmm.
and it is self. It is self.
Mm-hmm.
I always, when I talk to clients, I always talk about the importance of holding yourself accountable. Not blaming yourself, but holding yourself accountable. When you go into, or you consider going into a new relationship, it's important to understand or to ask yourself,
Mm-hmm.
is this the right thing for me now?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I at a stage where I have not forgiven,
Mm-hmm.
I am not healed,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm transferring this baggage,
Yes.
this hurt,
Mm-hmm.
into the new relationship?
Mm-hmm.
Now that could go one of two ways.
Mm-hmm.
Someone could be genuinely there who want to support you, and based on that hurt and baggage that you have brought into the relationship, it creates stress in the relationship and it doesn't blossom.
Mm-hmm.
Or if the person find themselves going into a situation where they're meeting a shadow of their previous relationship,
Mm-hmm.
that person sees that as an opportunity to take advantage of somebody who is powerless,
Mm-hmm.
unsure of self,
Mm-hmm.
and in a state of helplessness. So
Yes.
they can take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's important to hold yourself accountable and to take stock of self and to understand before you go into that new relationship. While you may have concerns and you may have those strong feelings of not wanting to be alone, it's important to understand that you're not ready for a new relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Often at times we model that for the young boys and girls in terms of relationship management.
Mm-hmm.
Moving from relationship to relationship to relationship, without treating with the hurts,
Mm-hmm.
issues of unforgiveness. Somebody once told me, unforgiveness is a sickness.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't treat with it, you can be chronically ill.
Yes.
In your spirit.
Yes.
In your spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important for persons to understand it's not just going to impact them, but it impacts how they model relationship management for young boys and girls.
Mm-hmm. Two things stood out to me while you were talking. I can only remember one. Because that I'm going into this relationship, forgiveness or maybe not forgiven resentment. I am abused. I'm an abused man. And I'm going into another relationship. Hurt, angry, maybe angry with self. How possible it is for an abusee to become an abuser. So because of all the hate and resentment, I now become what I hated the most.
Very possible.
And how do I as an individual guard myself from becoming what I hate the most?
Biggest threat to self is self.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest threat to self is self. And if you have a person who have that resentment, that hurt, that anger, and I was once the abused and now perpetrating those behaviors, we have to take a couple steps to remember that while this person was being abused, they were subliminally learning these tactics. This is what happened. This is how the person control me. This is what they do. These are the things that they say. And if you're being abused for years, it's very easy to start to model that behavior. Because now you want to regain that power. You want to regain that level of control. And if you go into a relationship where you recognize that the person is giving you all that you want, all that you needed, but you want more. You want to hold on to this thing that you have been chasing elusively of, and now you have it. You don't want to let it go. And for the most part, you haven't been taught how to love. So you don't know what is love. You don't know how to practice that. You find that the abuse now starts replicating those behaviors from their past relationship. And with that, they either justify the behaviors because of their past, or in some cases are not even aware that they're actually replicating the behaviors of their once perpetrator. So the likelihood of these behaviors to replicate is very likely, especially when one is not treating self. So you're carrying the hate, carrying the resentment. You want to pay back that person, and really and truly, it's a coping mechanism we call projection. Somebody hurt you, and you see that new partner, and they did something or say something that reminded you of that part.
So it triggers that.
It triggers the trauma.
Yes.
It triggers the hurt.
Yes.
And I have to defend myself, so I have to take lead.
Yes.
Before the situation overcomes me. And so I'm going to hurt that person. I'm going to get back at that person. I'm going to put that person in check. And they may become even more vicious, more aggressive than their previous circumstances.
Because what I'm also hearing here, Nigel, is that as an abused man and my abuser, but I love my wife, I love my partner, and maybe this is not the person that I met.
Right.
But what is going on?
Right.
This is not who I was quoting a year or two ago. What happened? So if there is an avenue for counseling and for healing, I know some persons may not even want to hear this in terms of the seeking help for the abuser, because they themselves may be mirroring what they have learned and what they have been using as a coping mechanism over the period of time, and lashing out and becoming very abusive towards their husband or their boyfriend. So there is hope in the sense that if I see that my partner desires to have counseling and wants to change, that I can help them along the way? Or do I just run and leave them because of self-preservation? But I am seeing a repentant person, a person who really wants the help, not in a disingenuous way, but a very genuine way. But this is not me. What have I become? What am I doing to you? What am I doing to my relationship? And wants help. Do I stay and help? By bringing in the necessary forces to help as well?
It's an excellent question, Mark, because the thing about it is that, and this is a spoiler alert for the persons who listen, not all perpetrators are bad people. I want to make that clear. Perpetrators are not bad people, and they actually have a lot of those charming traits um, that one sort of drew that person to them.
Yes.
And sometimes those controlling behaviors are triggered because they are dealing with their own issues, and they want to uh, control. They want to ensure that they retain that power with their partner. And when they are extremely abusive, it's a kind of cyclical process. They're abusive. There's a honeymoon period again. The person apologizes. I'm so sorry. I should not have done that. It's not the person that I want to be.
Yes.
And it's important inside you to realize that sometimes that's why it's difficult to leave. Because there's that aspect of that person's self that the abusee or victim knows of and wants to help. Should that person, if they can facilitate the support, do so, or should they run for the hills, as people would say? I would say, instead of making that judgment, call themselves, bringing that third party.
Right.
Bringing that in. Ask the question, you know, I feel like we are struggling. And the conversation can be quite simple like this. Hey, I feel like we're struggling. I recognize that things are happening that is hurting me, that is hurting you, and there's a need for us to work this out. I've been able to access professional support, professional help, and I want to be able to bring that in to help restore us individually, collectively.
Yes.
Would that be something we'd want to consider? If that individual says yes, then you have an opportunity to bring in a third party who's a professional, can make some professional assessments and give some recommendations on how you can move the step forward. To try to assess that on your own, hurt, damaged, wounded, traumatized, it's like throwing the dice up in the air and hoping to get snake eyes, 7.
Yes.
Chances are really slim.
Very slim. So the third party, whether it is counseling from someone like yourself, or your pastor, your pundit, your imam, whoever it is, your priest, bring in that third party to get that healing within the relationship. But then I want to do so. And this comes to a part where the healing process for abused men that really want to come out of the relationship or find that common ground where the healing can start for both my partner and I. But oh gosh, society is so judgmental. And even right in the church, the judging. And I believe that an abused man, because sometimes even in the statistics it says that where abused men reporting their abuse is very, very underreported as against abused women. And we just heard the case between Johnny Depp and what was the young something Heard?
Who immediately come to my mind?
Yes, it really escapes me right now. And she dared him. She dared him to go and make the report and see who would believe you. Because why? Imagine this movie star, popular, famous, coming out in public to see that I am being abused by my wife. So, how do we deal with the judgment. How do we push past that as a coping mechanism, as a tool to push past the judgment, and instead of remaining silent, be brave enough to speak out and say, I need the help. And for those of us who love to be judgmental, what do you have to say to those persons?
I would first want to look at it on the macro level. When we talk about judgment, that manifests itself through stigma and discrimination. So it's important for us through these platforms to educate persons. And when you're able to educate, it opens different pathways in terms of persons' awareness, their perceptions, their perspectives. And so it helps persons when they're educated or sensitized to how persons feel, think, and can potentially act, for persons to be a little more tempered in coming to judgment. So the level of stigma is reduced, the level of discriminatory behavior is restrained. So that's from the public education standpoint. For the individual, and I want to ask the persons who themselves may have witnessed someone else getting abused, may have known in their own families someone who may have gotten abused, or listen to this program this evening, may have found themselves the perpetrator of some of these behaviors. I ask those persons to consider their own families, their own loved ones, if they were the recipient of the behaviors that are being met out. How would you feel about that? If you are a perpetrator of domestic violence towards a man, and you were to see that being met out to your young son, your young daughter, how would you feel about that? And there's no need to respond now, but there's a need to think about it. There's a need to internalize it. It's about practicing empathy, Mark.
Empathy.
Taking yourself out of your situation, your own shoes, as we say. Putting yourself in the shoes of another. Looking at the world through the lens of another. Practicing compassion.
Yes. Compassion. I would ask my producer, can we go to a commercial break? Why aren't we hearing more discussion about domestic violence against men?
The fact that it's underreported, the labeling, the lack of social support, men find themselves not able to reach out and go out and get the support. He becomes the laughing stock of the agencies that are set up to provide that support and to give him the direction that is needed. There are a lot of men that are outside there hurting, who want to be heard, who want somebody to connect with. And it's important for you to understand that if you were to speak to persons in your own circle, they may make fun of you. There are options and opportunities for you to get support.
What are the threats to healthy relationships?
The nature of a relationship is to be equitable. And in an abusive relationship, we see the corruption of that equitable nature of a relationship, where there is this space of power and control that's entered, where one partner feels entitled to punish or regulate another person as a way to dominate them. So there is a pattern of violence, when a partner becomes defensive or when they stonewall, meaning that they just shut down, there's no communication happening. So all of these things can interplay and really erode the quality of the relationship.
Good evening, viewers. Good evening, fellow cooperators, and welcome back. Thank you for your time, and thank you for spending this evening with us. We are streaming live from our Westview headquarters, Western United Credit Union Cooperative Society Limited, right here at number 40 Fifth Street in Woodbrook, Trinidad and Tobago. For those of you who may be now joining us, we have in studio with me Mr. Nigel Thomas, and we have been having some very rich and fruitful conversation in terms of domestic violence against men and how we can start the healing process. What I'm going to do before we get back into the discussion, I want to invite any one of you who may have a question or a comment. You can easily raise your hand and my producer will elevate you and you will have the opportunity to ask your question or to make your comment. Be brave enough to do so. All right, like everybody frightened.
Well, this took me back to a place
Yes,
where I was recently doing a series workshop for men.
yes.
One of the things that stood out to me when I do these workshops, I always believe in having the camera on
Yes.
so we can connect with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I had two case studies that looked at father absenteeism.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, just like that, this drop of silence.
Mm-hmm.
And the first speaker who came on, he said to me, he said, Mr. Thomas, you hit home.
Mm-hmm.
You hit home. And you can hear his voice is shaking.
Yes.
And he started to speak to his own personal experiences
Mm-hmm.
and how it affected him,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately how it has shaped him as a father himself. And the one thing that he said is that this is the first time I've had this facility to be able to speak like this.
Yes.
And he was hopeful it wasn't the last.
Mm-hmm.
And it's these conversations, these opportunities where we're able to speak about these topical matters,
Mm-hmm.
that we have the opportunity not just to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a saying that the more we talk about domestic violence, the more we shy away from the issue, the more we lose. Russell Wilson.
Yes.
It's important for us to not shy away from these conversations. It can be a bit uncomfortable.
Yes.
But it's within that discomfort we have the opportunity to become comfortable.
Yes. Yes. How do I find my peace among my broken pieces?
Perfect.
Yes, I love that. And I am guessing that one of the reasons why people are always so hesitant to speak, and it comes back to us as a society being so judgmental, as though we ourselves do not go through any kind of trauma or any kind of challenge in life. So we project ourselves that we have it all together. And I think if we are accommodating, empathic, compassionate with ourselves and with others, we will give them the avenue to speak and to speak openly and frankly and really say how they are feeling as an abused man in society. Because, and I want us to address this again, because these things can lead to alcoholism, it can lead to depression, it can lead to suicide. I have nowhere to turn. Who is listening to me? If I go to the police station, even though I heard that they have been trained and they have improved in terms of their report about men who are abused and coming in to make their reports, but who is listening to me? And sometimes it just takes that one person to listen without being judgmental, to open the avenue for that person healing to start. What about the employers? Are we sensitive enough to realize that there is a difference in the behavior pattern within one of my workers? And instead of being judgmental or punitive, I call that person in, come, let's have a conversation. I realize something has changed in you. What it is. How do we as employers, Nigel, deal with a circumstance like that? And especially when we find out that my employee is an abused man. How do we deal with that?
We definitely have to be very sensitive and delicate in our approach to these situations. I applaud those employers who make it part of their policy to ensure that the wellness of their employees are priority. And employers can demonstrate and reinforce that by taking some simple steps to make employees who may feel threatened, who may have doubt or feel uncertain about getting support through their employers, they can take some simple steps to make it much more accommodating and supportive. The first thing, as you mentioned, is being able to recognize the signs. And what are those signs?
Yes.
Typically, when a person is struggling in the workplace, it starts to present itself sometimes behaviorally. Person starts to withdraw sometimes. They may start to become very, in other instances, very aggressive, demanding. In some instances, they may start to use substance or alcohol as a means to cope. Of course, these are dysfunctional ways of coping because that further worsens the circumstances.
Yes.
They may have challenges, so you see it behaviorally, you may see it socially in terms of employee relation. They start having a lot of conflicts, or they may not be able to work amongst teams because they want to be away, and that affects the workflow. And ultimately, you find that in those situations that it escalates to absenteeism, not in the workplace, high levels of sick leave. So there are a number of red flags that start cropping up, and so the employer now has a responsibility to engage the employee. Cognitively, this is this last one I just want to add. Cognitively, you may see lack of attentiveness, repeated mistakes, inability to concentrate. All these are red flags.
Mm-hmm.
Should these things start cropping up, supervisor, a manager who is vested in the well-being of the employees will then take that opportunity to do that. Say, come, sit down, let's have a chat. You haven't been yourself. And where possible, facilitate a support that person can get professional access to service. It could be an EAP, which is an employee assistance program or provider, or by looking at the employee's present circumstances in their own reasonable judgment.
Yes.
Using those same things you spoke to: compassion, empathy, thoughtfulness. These core human traits. Work with the employee, providing what I call a PIP, a personal improvement plan. So you start rearranging or re-engineering their workload so it's less burdensome. They probably have it broken up in such a way that they can become more manageable, and so they're able to manage their workload, and at the same time you offer them that support that they can access it outside. If the company doesn't provide an EAP, they can at least access the resources to say, here's a number you can tap. And that's why we have places like Families in Action that persons can be referred to be able to access support. So it's important to not just recognize the red flags as I've described them, but to take proactive steps in educating and availing them to those services.
And as you talk about the availing one to the various services, I would now ask the producer to put up on screen the various numbers where persons can access the service that they may need at any given time.
And you'll find as things go along and persons become more comfortable, either speaking to a co-worker, a supervisor, a manager, the atmosphere in the organization changes. And you talk about it not being punitive, but creating an atmosphere where persons feel supported.
Yes.
There's this saying, your health is your wealth.
Is your wealth, yes.
And there is no health, or rather there's no positive mental health or good mental health if it is you're not practicing that wellness.
Yes.
You have to practice it. And it's important that we can facilitate the environment so that persons get that support. So employers have a very critical role to support the employees, and if they do that, they will get the best of that best version of that individual.
And especially as a cooperative, because the cooperative, the focus is always on people. And when we focus on people and the holistic well-being, because we are not here only about the dollars and cents, but we are here so that you can realize your holistic prosperity, mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, and then of course financially. So that is really, really critical, that as employers we understand what our roles are, and especially as a cooperative, who the whole spirit and the whole meaning and identity of a cooperative is lifting people. And I keep hearing you saying it over and over, and when I hear you say it, I smile inside, because it is all about lifting people out of poverty. And when we talk about poverty, automatically we think about financial poverty, but there are other aspects to poverty: spiritual poverty, mental poverty, emotional poverty. So how do I take you out of poverty and out of a sense of hopelessness? And it starts with giving the support that is needed as an employer, as a cooperative, to ensure that my employee and my membership because we have to pay particular attention to our membership as well.
Yes.
Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Venus, if I may use you as an example, Nigel may be banking with us for years.
Yeah.
Nigel is part of the family. I know Nigel. And all of a sudden, the last 2 weeks, something has changed. And Nigel's behavior is different. And because of the type of camaraderie and that kind of family atmosphere and good membership care, I could be brave enough to either call Nigel aside or give him a phone call and say, Nigel, how are you?
Yes.
Are you okay? Realize for the past few weeks that something has changed. Even if you're not ready to talk about it now, I just want you to know that I am here for you.
Right.
We, your credit union, is here for you. And that gives the opening now for Nigel to speak. And if we don't have the right words to say, we have people like yourself that we can refer the members to in terms of getting the healing process all started. I can't believe it's 7:22 already.
Say, time flies.
Yes.
When you're having fun.
Fun. So, as our gift to our fathers, I really do hope that you hear and you understand and that you listen to what was said and what is being said, and that you really be brave enough and courageous enough to reach out if you need that help and to make the necessary change in your relationship, not only for yourself but also for your children. Because remember, they are looking on and seeing daddy being abused. And my young son, looking on at that, is saying to himself, this is normal. So as I grew up as a teenager, and as I grew up as a man, and maybe I am married, I too become an abused man. And go ahead, Nigel.
As you said that, something just popped into my mind, and it reminded me of something we had spoke to some time back when you raised the issue again about the society and its role in even in creating that space to make persons feel comfortable to access support. We have to be careful what we do collectively.
Mm-hmm.
There is this particular song that came into my mind. It's a soca rendition, and it's actually one of those tunes that is being played in the airwaves. And while it's used to talk about how men manage their relationships, there's a very salient message inside there.
Mm-hmm.
And when I listen to this song, now what local parlance we use the word horn for which relationship infidelity is used. And so the song is entitled "I Horn and First," where the man is sending a message in that musical rendition. Now remember, this is our cultural expression.
Yes.
And he is saying that he's going to take that action first. And in that song, verse by verse, he speaks of his first interaction as a young man at 10. And the abuse, the financial abuse he found himself years after, he still found himself experiencing that. The point I'm making is this: we have to be so careful of what we do, because it's not only impacting our men, as you rightfully said, it's impacting the young generation. And the young generation, when they hear this, as you just said, and it's sounds like the normal thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to do that
Mm-hmm.
because they're dancing to it, they're hearing it, and in that musical rendition, they're learning from it.
Yes.
We have a responsibility to draw the line in the sand,
Mm-hmm.
to make our young men and I guess even our young ladies aware
Yes.
of what healthy relationships should look like. And for men who maybe have been struggling with the quality of relationship that they would like, to take time for self, step back,
Mm-hmm.
as I said, hold self accountable,
Mm-hmm.
introspect, reflect, and project, and ultimately move into that place where you can heal, forgive, and go into a relationship that you can blossom. So by doing that, you can then set the model for the young ones coming up and to see what healthy relationships should look like.
Wow, very powerful. And that is key, is critical, because right now we are seeing a society that is spiraling out of control.
That's right.
And it is always very easy to play the blame game. Is the father, is the mother, is this one, is that one. But in the midst of it, our children are suffering because they are mimicking what they are being told by the adults. They have to be learning it somewhere. And as an abused individual, you must love self first. Jesus was very clear when he said that we should love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And he didn't mean it in a selfish way, but what he meant is, for me to love you, I have to love me. And what I would want for me, I would want it for you. And that in itself can put an end to domestic violence against men. One little key thing, that's just my own thing. I'm not a professional like this. But as it's now 7:28, I'll give you 1 minute to wrap up, and I will take 1 minute. We share it.
All right,
Yes.
that's good. I just want to say to the men who might find themselves in a place where they need support, to know that you can get that support. Reach out, talk to someone you trust, someone you can feel comfortable open up to. And when you find that person, make it that opportunity that you can change your life. Remember, you are not defined by your circumstances. You can choose to become who you want to be.
Thank you so much, Nigel. And I endorse what Nigel said. And I just want to leave you with these few words. St. Francis of Assisi said, sanctify yourself, and you will sanctify society. What does that mean? It starts with us. The change that we want starts with us, the better person. And as we start with us, we then transfer that sanctification into society, making it a better place to be. I want to thank all of you for joining us. Encourage persons to visit our website, to visit our Facebook page, our Instagram page, our YouTube page, so that they can relax and listen to this rich discussion on domestic violence against men. Your credit union cares for you. and by extension, it cares for the community. If you have any problems or you want to talk, you can feel free to call us. And of course, we would refer you to Nigel Thomas, who indeed would assist you with the healing process. I am Mark Ferret, President of Western United Credit Union. Good night.